Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to get started in just about 30 seconds to 1 minute. We're going to give everyone the opportunity to log in. But thank you so much for attending today's webinar, which will be a 12 series webinar, which will be hosted by M2E and multiple other vendors. Today, we have the great pleasure of having M2E, having Siegfried, Rivera, and GlobalPro. We're going to give everyone the opportunity to give a small introduction, and then we'll get to today's topic. Which again, today we'll be going over the 40 and 50-year recertification process. If you're just logging in, we're going to get started in about 30 seconds. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A below. Go ahead and place your questions there. We will do our best to answer any and all questions that are placed. If we're not able to reach your question, please don't hesitate to reach out to the professional that you believe would best answer your question. We will be placing the contact information for all four firms in the Q&A as well once we get started. Again, thank you for being here today. It looks like we've got to a steady number of participants, I should say, that are ready to go. So I think we should get started. So why don't we get this 40-year and 50-year recertification process started with no one else but Misha from M2E. If you could say a little bit about yourself and your firm.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this seminar. My name is Misha. My last name is unpronounceable. I am the founder and president of M2E Consulting Engineers. We are a full-service engineering firm, which simply means that we have all the disciplines in-house. We are the foremost and most recognized forensic firm in the area, and we look forward to explain exactly how our services can be of service to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Misha, for being here with us today. Next up, we have Jason Rodgers-Da Cruz from Siegfried Rivera. Jason, if you could say a little intro.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Rodgers-Da Cruz. I'm a shareholder with Siegfried Rivera. Siegfried Rivera is a condominium / construction law firm. I am the chair of the Construction Defect Trial Practice Group. I am a trial attorney, and I look forward to this presentation today and talking to you all and addressing your questions.
Thank you, Jason, for being here with us today. And last and definitely not least, Dan Odess with GlobalPro, if you could give us a little introduction on yourself and your firm.
Well, thank you very much, Rafael, and also to my fellow panelists. Very honored to be here with everyone, and looking forward to an awesome series, 12 parts, obviously. Make sure you subscribe and follow us throughout this entire series, because I think it's been great information. I'm Dan Odess, president of GlobalPro, where we manage risk to recovery. We've managed more than $1 billion of recovery, and tens of millions of dollars of that recovery is for buildings and properties that have either collapsed or are in the process of collapsing or have some sort of structural failure. So have a lot of information we want to share with you, and look forward to getting started.
Thank you so much, Des. And I have to resonate with what you stated. It's also a pleasure to be here alongside these three great organizations, which are industry experts. As for myself, my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Affinity Management Services. We are a community association management company. We service both Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. Well, enough about us. I think people are here to learn a little bit about the 40-year recertification process. So why don't you kick it off for us, Misha, and maybe give a bit of an explanation of when the recertification process began and why that started.
In the mid-70s, I think it's 1974, the structural failure of a building that was actually housing a federal agency in downtown Miami triggered the process of Dade County starting what they called building safety certification at that time. And that was the beginning of the 40 years recertification, which essentially said if your building meets a certain criteria, you need to, 40 years after beneficial occupancy or CO, conduct a survey of the building and essentially assure that it is structurally sound. Later on, electrical was added, and in the current form, it has been therefore in effect for more or less since the mid-70s. 30 years later, 2004, Broward essentially incorporated the same procedures, just on a different title box, I guess, in implementing those same requirements for buildings of similar geometry in Broward County. So today, Broward and Dade have essentially the same 40, 50, 60, 70, because we call it 40, 50, but it's actually 40 years and every 10 years thereafter. the type of certification need to be done. And essentially, it means, is your building safe to be occupied?
Okay, excellent. Thank you for those points. And if we could explain a little bit with regards to the legal side of it. I mean, there's a lot of components that go into a 40-year recertification process. Jason, if you could give us a little bit of a lowdown on the legal side of things, and what does the attorney, how is the attorney involved, I'm sorry, in the 40 and 50-year recertification process?
Yeah, sure. So typically, and Misha is going to get into this, well, not typically, it is required that as part of the 40-year recertification process or 50-year recertification process, that there be a engineering statement that Misha is going to get into that complies with the local ordinance. And it's important that obviously an engineer, or I believe an architect, can issue the statement. My preference is obviously an engineer. Getting a qualified engineer to do that is beneficial for the association. Where legal comes into play is assisting the association. First, number one, making sure we properly vet the individuals or entities that are going to prepare that 50-year or 40-year recertification report. Number two, we assist in negotiating and drafting contracts and drafting the actual contracts for that engineering scope of work. Number three, to the extent there is work to be performed, then we assist the engineers and the association in selecting a contractor and, of course, negotiating and drafting contracts for the actual construction. And then finally, of course, I'm just distilling it for you all as a 50,000-foot view, but in the event there are issues with the 40 or 50-year recertification process, such as violations from the county, we as lawyers get involved in administrative hearings, which are evidentiary hearings where we put on our experts such as Misha to talk about the condition of the building. And finally, aside from administrative hearings, there could also be litigation that arises from, the 40, 50-year certification process. So that's it in a nutshell as to how lawyers get involved.
Correct. Thank you, Jason. It sounds to me that it's very important that, that all industry experts are involved throughout this process. So Misha, I'm going to kick it back to you when it comes to the 40-year recertification process. If you can give us a little bit of an explanation of what the engineer's role is, and also of the report. I mean, I know that the counties are slightly different, but if you can give them an understanding of what the report is composed of, what the engineer typically would do, and what responsibility the engineer has to do now, if there are any, when it comes to if you see issues that could be a life safety concern.
Yes, well, the report itself is actually, as far as its form, outlined by what we call authority having jurisdiction, in this case, counties. They literally have a form that you need to fill up as an engineer, but for every comment, there is the typical, then if no, please comment type of thing. Is everything okay? If no, please comment. When you do like a medical form. Are you allergic? If yes, to what? In this case, we look at the entire building, specifically from a structural standpoint. And that means the concrete, the steel, the visible signs of stress. And based on our experience, we can say whether those signs of stress are normal for the age of the building, or they have been aggravated by a lack of maintenance. For every of the items that we essentially don't like or needs repair, we need to stipulate what is wrong, why believe it's wrong, and what needs to be done. And the report itself, when it's completed, both from a structural and an electrical standpoint, is then submitted to the authority having jurisdiction, and it's kind of a fork in the road. Fork to the left, everything is fine. It just get filed, you have another 10 years, great. Fork in the right, there is something wrong. Essentially, it is sitting down and saying, we know that something is wrong. This is what we believe is wrong. Please give us time to comply, which is why the timing of hiring an engineer and starting this is not at 39 years and 364 days.
Right.
That's not when to do it. And the main reason is actually not a structural or an electrical issue. The main reason is money. If there is really something that needs to be repaired, And if the building was not taken care of, which you don't know until you look, you need to have time to secure the funds in order to finance the actual repair work. And at some point, we're going to get specifically in what is a good time to do this and why is it a good time to do it way in advance. But essentially, what happens is that if you got into the right branch, which is some repairs need to be done, our obligation, for our professional obligation, as our licensing laws stipulate clearly that if the building is in imminent danger of representing a structural issue that may be life safety, we need to vacate the building. We will call it what is called an unsafe structure. This is very rare, because that means that something really bad happened over time and somebody either chose to ignore it or didn't see it, but it's rare. So this is not an exercise in how to get panic in the room. The thing is that we have a fiduciary obligation based on our licensing and for the life and safety of our clients, like everybody on this call, to notify them that, for example, you can't use your terraces. The building is safe inside, but you can't use your terraces. And we're condemning the terraces because chunks of pieces of terraces can fall on somebody's head or on somebody's car. Our obligation is to be truthful and ethical to our clients. And that's going to probably go in another discussion about what is a good engineer. And I think that we can leave that for a better discussion. But often, and Jason and I experienced that for sure. I'm sure at some point Dan looked at that. Up to the tragic event in Surfside, a good condo board was the board that doesn't spend money. And a good condo board that is a condo board that doesn't spend money uses the cheapest engineer, who is the most likely to tell them not the truth, but what they want to hear. Mm-hmm. We have actually experienced where we would give a do not pass on a building, only to be essentially asked to step out because engineer B, who is the friend of the uncle of the mother-in-law of the sister of the board member, is ready to pass it. And that board comes back as a victory by saying, yay, we got the engineer to give us a pass. The consequences are not immediate, but what has happened and what we have experienced is that the next time you come for certification is going to cost you what you should have done in the previous certification, plus everything that went bad in the meantime.
Yeah. No, and I would agree with you, Misha. I know we see it being on the management side where you can always get someone, at a cheaper price, or someone that maybe is not an industry expert, doesn't really understand what needs to get done. Because if I'm understanding you correctly, the report itself is really broken down into an electrical and a structural report that must be filled out by the engineer. And it's just a yay or nay, whether you pass or not. So yes, you could probably find an engineer, but as a board, you have a fiduciary responsibility, not only to yourself as a board member, but also to the residents that you're serving within that community. So just, as a tip for the board members that are on the call, or managers, just make sure that you're working with industry experts that are really put themselves out there, that understand what the need is. It's not always about the cost. Many times you get much more value from an individual that's an expert and knows what they're doing, and they can coach you and guide you throughout the process. Because the last thing after what occurred in Champlain that you want is to be putting yourselves, your board, or your association in a position where you find yourself in a very difficult position because you made a not so great decision. And Misha, I want to keep it here with you. I have another good question that came up here. Is I have a gentleman named Charles that he's asking, is there some kind of database that a manager can go into in Broward that lets him know that if the proper documentation has been turned in? So I'm assuming that this can happen in the case where, let's say, there's a new manager or a new management company that comes in and they don't know if they've passed the 40-year or not. Is there somewhere that they can check to know if this has been done?
Planning and zoning I don't know how it's happening in Broward, but Sometimes it's at the level of cities, sometimes it's at the level of the county. But building and zoning has a master database that is retrievable.
Okay.
So
Yeah, you can-
essentially,
Sorry.
go ahead.
You can also make a public records request by law to the building department,
Excellent.
and the building department will make the documents available for you, or at least tell you where they are. You can go down there and you can make copies.
We know that it's available because people who do 40, 50 years certification for a living actually go and preemptively go to buildings and say, by the way, did you know that you didn't still file your 40, 50 years? Would you like to hire us? It would be a good idea to start earlier.
Correct. I would definitely agree with you there. So Dan, I want to bring you into the conversation. I know that, many times, boards are wondering, is this something that could be covered by our insurance? I know you and your firm have helped associations recover millions of dollars. I think I actually heard you say billion. So if you can kind of give our audience a little bit of an understanding of what they could do or can't do from an insurance perspective or from a claim perspective.
Well, thank you, Rafael. Yeah, it is a billion, over $1 billion now. We're going on 10 years next March. Looking forward to it, and we continue to count down to that. It happened. There's 3 opportunities where we see the things that are addressed in the 40-year, 50-year recertification may be covered by insurance. The first opportunity is when the concrete falls. And sometimes that occurs well before we're doing the 40 and 50-year recertification. So when that concrete does fall, whether it's from the beam or the column or from underneath a pool deck or a balcony, that is your opportunity to make claims. And most commercial policies sold to community associations in the great state of Florida do provide coverage for falling concrete. So it's important, though, that when you see or are notice of the issue, that you do make prompt notice of it. That's not immediate notice. So a lot of people confuse this idea of immediately making notice of something versus prompt notice. The second opportunity is when you're actually going to do or doing the 40-year recertification, because you discover things about your building that were unforeseen or unknown of at that point or up until that point. At that point is an opportunity to review your policies, to look at coverages, and to understand where you're going to obtain the necessary financing or the money to actually make the repairs that may be included in the 40 recertification process. The last opportunity is after you get the report. This is certainly the most difficult time to actually make claims or obtain any sort of recovery. Why? Because a lot of times we've been on notice of these issues for a long time. The reports are written in a way that they don't help you in as relates to coverage. They may include words that are used in policies that otherwise exclude coverage for loss and damage, as opposed to assisting or helping you with it. Remember, words in a contract get meaning from words around them, right? So we want to make sure that we are using the terms and words and definitions that affords you coverage. And there's many different ways to say different things. And sometimes those things that the way we say them or the way we explain things may exclude coverage or not afford you any sort of type of relief through the means of insurance. This is not to say that all things in your 40 recertification and the one example I gave regarding the falling concrete are the only things, or that everything will be covered. There are an enormous amount of limitations. The policies are getting more expensive and they cover less and less. So, but what's important here is that once you're on notice of the issue, whether it's again in the first opportunity or the second or the third, that as a board or as a property manager, that you immediately take steps to investigate potential recovery for insurance, because otherwise there's only really 2 other alternatives, right? Special assessment or a bank loan. So to avoid those fates or to mitigate the need for a special assessment or the amount of it or the amount of a loan, this is your opportunity to use what you've been paying for so long, and that you pay more for than pretty much anything else at your property. And we help through that entire process and understanding it and analyzing it and making sure that you can identify certain coverages. And that's your opportunity there to do those things.
Yeah, excellent point. I mean, with the amount of money that associations spend in insurances, most of the time that's one of the higher ticket items, depending on the size of the association. It does help to just make a phone call to someone and say, hey, would this be covered? I know many times manager get lost with, oh, you have to file a claim immediately. The person, in my opinion, we always recommend to call first is a firm such as yours, a public adjuster that can kind of guide you and give you the inside knowledge, because the insurance company is not going to provide you all the inside knowledge that's necessary. So, and when it comes to, let's say from the management perspective, I know as Misha stated earlier, you definitely don't want to wait till 39 years. You know, we've always taken the position that you need to, I would say, if you can, 5 years out, start thinking about it. A lot of times, the most important thing within the building is its envelope, and the envelope is its paint. So if you haven't painted your building in 5, 7 years, that's something that you need to be keeping top of mind. But from the management perspective, what the manager should be in charge of is really putting together the team of experts such as today to be able to present these individuals to the board of directors and letting them know these are the 2 or 3 individuals that are industry experts that know what they're doing, that can address the concerns within your particular community. And then it's up to the board of directors to make the decision. Hopefully, in most cases, they're not making the decision purely on price. They're making the decision on the value that the individual brings to the table and the expertise that they have. But I couldn't agree more with Misha that you definitely don't want to wait till you get that letter. The earlier you get started, the easier the process is going to be for you. Because as most associations in South Florida, they're struggling at the moment to have necessary funds just to run the association to do big repairs. So in a 40-year, if you haven't done much to your building, the potential of you going to that right fork, as Misha stated, it's going to be very expensive. So the earlier you get started, the more you can pre-plan and the more you can take whatever steps you need to take to execute that plan. So Jason, I do know that we get a lot of questions from a management side of, you know, what responsibility does an association have to like structurally maintain the building, let's say from a legal side of it? Because sure. It's a big fiduciary responsibility that these boards have.
Right. So remember that when you're living in a homeowners association, condominium association, any type of association, you're living in a shared community with shared responsibilities. This isn't a single family home where you can defer maintenance for years on end until you've got serious problems with your home. Now you're sharing a community with others, and it impacts everyone in the community. So the obligations of an association arise from 2 different areas. One, the governing documents of the association. And what do I mean by that? I'm referring to the Declaration of Condominium. I'm referring to the bylaws. I'm referring to those particular documents that obligate the association to maintain the common elements. And so it will outline the common elements within the declaration. Rafael, as you know, having reviewed many declarations of condominium, and it certainly outlines the responsibilities of the association, whether it be the structure, the roof, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing components. It's outlined there as to those responsibilities. The second area that we look at would be the Condominium Act under Chapter 718. And in looking at 718, I'll pull it up and read it to you all, or read a snippet of it. It's section 718.113 sub 1. It's entitled Maintenance. And what it says is that maintenance of the common elements is the responsibility of the association. It's written in the law. So what does that mean for associations? That means they must maintain their property. And that doesn't mean wait until the 40-year period. It is not uncommon for associations, especially new associations, to commission an engineering firm. Misha and I have worked on, but 50 or more projects, maybe 100 projects, where Misha's involved in generating what's called a turnover report that assesses the condition of the building, whether it's the structural components, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, roof, stucco, the whole 9 yards, so that the association understands what they have, understands what they have to maintain in the future. So I think a lot of us, especially the older associations, have reached out to me and said, hey, what's up with this 40, 50-year recertification? We have to generate a report. And I let them know you should be constantly maintaining your building and assessing the condition of your building. It is a constant process, like changing the oil of your car. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly important. You have to do it timely. You have to do it regularly. Or if you don't, you're faced with a situation at the end where the financial aspect comes into play and the costs become, very expensive because you didn't address a $100,000 item 10 years ago. Now that $100,000 item is now 800,000 plus. So.
Correct. No, and excellent point, Jason. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I know from a management side, we take that position that the preventative maintenance avoids you from going to a point where you have to pass these astronomical special assessments. And really that happens because there's been no planning between when the issue started. And many times, I'm sure Misha can attest to it, you'll find boards in positions, well, let's have the chief engineer or let's have the maintenance guy fix that rusted rebar. And that's definitely something that
we actually had it painted in one of the buildings,
yeah,
because the painted rebar is in white. It's so much less obvious than the rusting one. I often refer to a building as a living thing.
Organism, yeah, you can say that.
And so you can eat healthy and exercise, and you will probably do well into your 50s and your 60s, right? Or you can have fries and live on your sofa, and you'll probably have a coronary by 30. There is no difference within that and a building. A building's envelope, as we call it, is essentially made of layers, each layer relying on the next one. So you have the structural substrate, which is the concrete, the block. Then you have the stucco on top of it and the paint on top of it. The paint protects the stucco, and the paint and the stucco protect the concrete and its rebar. So if you use a good paint applied by a good painter, it will last you between 5 and 7 years. The quality of the paint is typically defined by one parameter only. How thick can you apply it in one application? So there is more paint to eat, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
We live in South Florida in what is the most aggressive environment. And I know this is my mantra, because we have the ocean to the east, we have the Everglades to the west, we have underground water below us, and then we have hurricane and rain from the top. The combination of salt and water is detrimental to any building component. So first, from a physical standpoint, understand that paint is not forever, and that paint under UV eventually disintegrates and gets eaten up, literally eaten up. Stucco is a porous material that was initially developed for actually fireproofing, and it's not destined to protect your building from water intrusion. And finally, once that you breach both the paint and the stucco, you get to a point where your salty, wet, and humid components are adhering and then penetrating through a capillary effect the concrete itself until it reaches steel. Steel rust, and at steel rust, it expands, pushes the concrete away, which is what we call spalling. Well, if you paint your building regularly, it will take longer for the paint to be eaten up and to get to the stucco. If you seal the cracks in the stucco as they occur, because stucco cracks as a natural phenomenon. In other words, shrinkage cracks as the building moves, and all buildings move, by the way. You just don't see it. They don't sway, but they move. Cracks form, so the sooner you seal them and paint them, the better it is. Or you can not paint, not seal your cracks, and then be surprised by the fact that now chunks of stucco are falling off, and as a result, chunks of concrete are falling off. Well, the thing is that you talked about price versus value, and this is something that is difficult, I guess, not difficult to explain, but difficult to sell back, I guess, to the homeowners. The cost of construction and repair is an order of magnitude higher than the cost of the engineering fees. I'm going to repeat this one more time. The cost of construction and repair is an order of magnitude higher than the cost of engineering fees. So if the engineer is 1, repair is 10 or 20 or 30, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You cannot save on both. Which one do you save on? Do you save on the engineer who is going to just tell you what you want and then have to spend the 30, 20, 40? Or do you spend maybe 2 on a twice more expensive engineer. Oh my God. But then spend only 10 or 15, because that engineer will tell you, you really need to do this, because if you do it now in time, it will be the effect of going back to the gym, although you have signs of cholesterol. So you fix your stucco, you inject the cracks, you repaint your building, you're good. And so when the next certification comes, you are not in disarray. We have on and on being faced not necessarily with 40, but at the edge of the 50 years of certification. We are told, could you come and take a look at the building? It's a 50 years certification, but it shouldn't be any problem because we passed our 40 years certification with flying colors. Okay, show me your report. Sure enough, the report says, you know, minor this, minor that. And we go there, it's a tragedy. And we go, well, what happened here? Oh, they told us that it was not that big a deal. How about that? Oh, that was not the deal. Well, that was actually a big deal. So what happened is that here you saved money. So now you have to do not only what you should have done at the 40 years, but everything that caused to go bad for the next 10 years. And the numbers are astronomical. And people are angry. And the board from 10 years ago is not even living there anymore.
Yeah.
And we can't afford this. What can we do? And we cannot change the law of physics. I cannot look at something. It's like a doctor. I look at you. I give you what the situation is with you. If you have something that, you know, if you have a grave illness, I cannot tell you to take two aspirins and wake up in the morning.
I think, Rafael,
go ahead.
I think what Misha is talking about is the fact that a lot of unit owners are buying units in condominium high-rise buildings for the short term, not long term. Mm-hmm. And particularly in South Florida, we see a cycle, right? Where you have a lot of investors, you have foreign investors who never even go to the properties, don't see it, and they buy these units based on a spreadsheet. And the idea is that there's an exit at some point. So all they're concerned about or interested in doing is making sure that the property is maintained to a certain point. So as long as it doesn't impact that spreadsheet or that pro forma in the real estate world, as we call it, we do redevelop and have a construction arm and development firm. And we understand the desire to focus on performance and look at those things for investor reasons and et cetera. But the reality is these condominium buildings are neighborhoods, basically vertical neighborhoods, and the health and safety of that building is important. And the health of it, as to Misha's point, you know, think of this as like a living organism, basically, and you need to maintain it. You need to take care of it. You need to make sure that you're giving back to it and deferring these things because of the interesting market that we have in South Florida with investor interest and obviously the spike in real estate values. But I think people need to also consider the fact that if you're not investing in infrastructure into the repair of these properties and maintaining them and adhering to the protocols and doing these things and taking care of the paint, now people are going to start looking differently at potential investments in those buildings. Suddenly you're not going to be able to get the money that you're demanding just because your pool furniture is new, you know, and you decided to put white paint on the exposed rebar, as Misha mentioned. So I think things are going to change, and I think that the buyers are going to become more educated, and I think that a lot of board members and unit owners need to be wise about that it's not about how cool your hallways or your lobby looks anymore. Now people want to know about your 40-year. They want to know about the maintenance of it. They want to know who the engineer is that looked at it and who they are and what they did and who the attorney is that gave advice. I know one particular association that we were representing right now who did have a failed pool deck. There was some questions about the pending claim, and there was a lot of inquiry about the engineer that was on it and the attorney that was giving counsel and divulging information. They wanted to talk to the attorney about you know, the advice they were giving to the association. So again, I think word of the wise is understand that the buyer is smarter. They're going to be asking a lot more questions. And again, if you're interested in protecting your investment and you're looking for a quick exit, people are going to start looking very closely at the health and safety of the building and what you're doing to protect it.
I would agree with you 100% there, Dan. I mean, we're already seeing it. You're seeing it from the insurance side where they're taking now their inspections are much more thorough whenever they bind the policy. You're seeing it from buyers. We're seeing an uptick in questionnaires being requested from management, and they're asking some specific questions. You know, when was the last time an engineer report was done? So we're slowly seeing this. Further, the eyes have been peeled back from our legislators. There's a task force that's being formed, and there's already talks of potentially, you know, a lot of this happens because of the lack of reserves or the lack of funding in these associations. And what we need is, and I know some people don't want to take the hard position that reserves should be required. I take that hard position that I do believe they should be required, because it's going to make the lives much easier for the board member and be able to make the right decision for the community. Because if the funds are there, you're working with an engineer, let's say that does a recertification every 3 years or a reserve study every 3 to 4 years. You have that reserve study. It gives you a guidance of what you should be putting away. Those associations that don't have money right now, I know it's a challenge, but we just need to come up with a solution. And like some of the things that I've been putting out there publicly is there's a way for us to catch up reserves. In HOAs, you have the ability of doing capital contributions during resales. That's a way to put that into the condo law that allows associations to be able to do that. But in order for us to truly, truly solve these problems, we need to make the lives of the board members a little bit easier. And unfortunately, I'm not one to push government into too many things. But in this case, I do believe that reserves would help make these board members make the right decisions. Go ahead.
The changes are already happening, and the smart people already imply them, and the smart people are, of course, the banks.
Yeah.
If you try to buy a condo today in an older building, you have to supply the bank with the 40 years Re-cert. And if there is something in the 40 or 50 years Re-cert that had a flag, they want to see a building permit and who is selected to repair it. So if you are in a building that either conveniently omitted to file their 40 years Re-cert or has problem as it relates to that, but decides not to address them, you will not be able to sell your unit because nobody will finance the purchase in the unit. So the banks already reacted, and the percentage of leverage for buildings that are older than X amount of years is already changed. It's already happening. We are already talking about things that the industry already reacted to. I think that, Dan, you talked about the fact that even getting loans for condo association, which used to be a song and a dance, now is going to be difficult because some of the more important players are stepping away from it. And when you talk about reserves, I actually had a discussion with Jason about it. The waiving of reserves was actually done in the legislature because of the lobbying from the real estate industry and the realtors lobby, right? Which are people who make money out of selling real estate, not living in that real estate. And it's kind of unfair for the people who actually care for the building and live there for a long time, because if you are using that building from year 3 to year 23, you're using the elevator, you're using the facilities, you're using the roof that doesn't make you leak, you're using the windows and the sliding glass doors who are not leaking, but you contribute 0 towards eventually maintaining them. And the year 23 plus 1 day you sell it, then the guy who bought it at 23 years plus 2 days is slapped with a huge assessment because everything that you and the lack of use forgot or chose not to maintain for 23 years, now he does his, but it's not only a Band-Aid now. Now he needs, because it was never painted, he needs to do a concrete resto, because the gaskets on the windows have recrystallized. You need to actually service every single piece of glazing. And instead of being a routine thing for him, the fact that you chose not to maintain for 23 years is the reason for that cost.
So I have a couple of points on that.
Sure, go ahead, Jason.
So back in 2008, and anybody can look this up, the legislature enacted, and again, in the Condominium Act, section 718.113, and it's now been repealed. So it was in effect between 2008 and 2010, and it states the following: as to any condominium building greater than 3 stories in height, at least every 5 years, The board shall have the condominium building inspected to provide a report under seal of an architect or engineer authorized to practice in this state, attesting to the required maintenance, useful life, and replacement costs of the common elements. So that was the law for 2 years. And at some point it was repealed in 2010. Not sure exactly as to why it was repealed, but we can all guess that during the downturn in the economy, a lot of people were complaining about that and, certainly wanted to get rid of this requirement. But this requirement back in 2008 was very important because it required the association to hire that engineering firm to prepare that report so they could understand what was required as far as maintenance and replacement costs and the useful life of the building. What I see is not, and Rafael, you probably see this as well, I haven't come across a board that basically says, look, we don't have to do anything. We're not going to do anything. We're going to shirk our responsibilities. We're not going to paint the building. We're just going to do nothing. We're going to let it crumble. I don't see that. What I see instead is the board not being properly advised. And the vetting process is very limited. So the term maintenance engineer is a misnomer. Maintenance personnel, not maintenance engineer. An engineer is Misha, professional engineer. That is an engineer. So the board may think to themselves, well, we'll just have the maintenance engineer, paint this area or handle it this way and it'll address the problem. And they feel good about themselves because they feel like they've done what they needed to do, as opposed to being properly advised and hiring and vetting the right engineer, not just any engineer, but the right person, making sure that your legal counsel is the right person to properly advise you and assist you in addressing those issues and selecting the correct engineers and helping you select the right people for evaluating your structure. Because you have, I'll just talk about my profession, you have lawyers that practice in certain areas and you have lawyers that are more specialized in certain areas, such as myself. I'm a construction trial attorney. I've taken over, I don't know, probably 700, 800 depositions. I don't know how many experts I've deposed. So I've talked to all of them under oath. I've vetted them. I've questioned them. I've even deposed Misha, so I'm fortunate to work with excellent engineers such as Misha. And I've also worked with and deposed really horrible engineers, and they are not created equal, right? Just as any doctor is not created equal, any lawyer is not created equal, and they all don't have the same experience to properly advise the association. So I think for me, that's one of the biggest issues. Another thing that I see is an association saying, look, I've got to perform stucco repairs. I don't need an engineer for that. Just hire a stucco subcontractor. And here's a proposal. They'll go ahead and sign it, which is the worst contract of all time. Doesn't protect the association. No bonds attached to it. No specifications as part of it. And they just move forward with that subcontractor, which is the wrong thing to do. You need to get an engineer involved, such as Misha, with a lot of experience, understands all the building systems, understands how they all work together. And that stucco project could be more than just stucco. It could be concrete restoration. It could be, structural steel restoration as well. So really need experts involved.
100%, Jason, but also there have been, I have seen situations, in most cases, I would say very high percentage, most board members want to do the right thing. And you're right, if you're not working with, let's say, a right management professional, or if you're self-managed, your manager doesn't have the expertise to start pointing out the things that are going to be long-term concerns for the association, yes, that's a detriment to that particular association. But at the end of the day, there's also that challenge where they know what they need to do, but unfortunately they don't want to do it because, again, it's their neighbors. Nothing against these board members, right? They're volunteers. They don't get paid for what they do. At least we get the advantage where we're getting paid for what we do. However, it becomes very difficult. And that's why, again, I really take that hard line that I'm hopeful that this is an opportunity for our industry to really push that reserve onto the associations, whether, again, it's needed because if they have that in their funds and they have the proper planning, working with the property engineers, then it's going to be easier to make that decision, because at the end of the day, as you stated, Jason, most board members want to do the right thing. And where it becomes a challenge is when you have to, say that word of, oh, we have to pass a special assessment. A gentleman here, Mark, on the chat mentions poor budgeting equals special assessment. And that's 100% on point. So, what baffles me the most, to be honest, is until Champlain happened, no one knew that Dade and Broward County were the only ones that had 40 recertifications. So I wanted to kind of throw it back at Misha.
It's unfortunate that as a society, it had to be a tragedy, because the Jasons and the Dans and the Mishas of this world tell them this all the time, because if you don't, then this is going to happen, and they would tell us, no, not really.
Yeah. Now, Misha, I did want to ask you, do you know like the background of why these two counties are the only ones in the entire state that require the 40-year, and what do you believe is going to occur moving forward? Like, what would be your recommendations, I guess I should say?
Talk to your political representative. Essentially, the reason why it happened in Dade, as I said, was again a catastrophe. And then Broward intelligently realized that there is no geographic difference in the environment that they are facing versus Dade, so they passed it. The salt, the air, and the water doesn't magically change between the Broward and Palm Beach line, or between Dade County and the Keys. It's the same environment. And as a matter of fact, the west coast of Florida has a completely different code than we do.
Yeah.
And yet, if you recall, the last half dozen of hurricanes landed on that side.
Yeah.
So Mother Nature really doesn't care about political line drawn in the sand. Why is unfortunately, because we had a catastrophe, and then that triggered that happening. I know for a fact that I believe the city of Boca Raton is considering going at it kind of alone.
Correct.
Which would be the beginning of a domino effect. I read a statement from elected officials saying that we will do a tactful and measured response to this event that we're studying and so forth. But the bottom line is, again, I'm an engineer, I'm not a politician.
Yeah.
There is no difference between a building in Palm Beach and Broward and Dade. None. Zero. The exposure is exactly the same. So
with that said, what do you recommend? Like these like say we have some participants on the call today that are in Palm Beach. What's your recommendation? Like what should they do? Because I mean, maybe their city officials require them to provide some kind of basic notice right now, but what do you recommend them to do?
Listen, you can't fix what you don't know. So if you didn't have a thorough engineering inspection, by the way, we have an office in West Palm, and that office is getting a lot of inquiries, essentially asking us the same question you're asking. What if I'm asked to conform or within X amount of days? And our West Palm Beach office is getting a lot of inquiries for worried old condominiums saying, wait a second, we are no different than the Champlains of this world by age, by occupancy type, by everything else. What happened?
Yeah.
And the answer is we engineers don't have an answer. So what do I recommend is get a reputable engineer to give you your pulse. Essentially, how good or how bad is it? The fork in the road, the left and the right fork. At that point, at least you would know, A, if you're healthy, that you're healthy. If you're not healthy, how unhealthy you are. The next step would be to scope what it would cost you to be healthy. Because there is no certification process, you don't have a knife to your throat to happen it by next Tuesday. But an honest engineer will tell you the actual condition that you're in and essentially say, listen, I'm going to do these things, even if you didn't, have healthy food, I didn't exercise, I'm going to put 2 stents and I'm going to give you vitamins. But then from now on, this is what I need you to do. And that we need essentially.
So Misha, let's say that sticking to your analogy there, let's say that they were eating McDonald's and the report fails. what happens in that case? Like, what do board members need to keep in mind? And then Jason, I'll let you jump in. I'm sorry.
There is another fork in the road there. Is it a life safety issue or not? If it's a life safety issue, we need to inform the building official. If it's not a life safety issue, we issue the report and we tell them this is what you need to do. By the way, if you continue to eat McDonald's for another 3 months, you're going to die of a coronary. But right now you are on your last 10 yards. So, by the way, I'm obviously not endorsed by McDonald's. I'm sure that you noticed that.
So Jason, Jason, you wanted to jump in there and say something?
Yeah, so 2 points. To your prior question about West Palm Beach, et cetera, what can be done? I bring everybody back to the Condominium Act. It says maintenance of the common elements is a responsibility of the association. So that's mandatory. Okay, everybody needs to understand that. The association must maintain. It doesn't go into detail, but it gives you that broad mandate that this is your responsibility. You need to handle it. Number two, going to what happens if we don't pass the 40-year recertification. The county and or city has a lot of power and they issue violations. And they require that you comply within a certain period of time. And they issue sanctions and fines that may be $1,000 a day, if not greater. So it just depends. Cities can also, or counties can also red tag your building, declare it unsafe, and demand that everyone evacuate. So, you know, these are very serious issues because of, you know, so think about, you know, these associations need to think about it that way. Because if they fail to maintain their property and they allow it to lapse and they get to a point where it's an unsafe structure, then guess what? Everyone's evacuated and everyone's gone from the building. 100 people have to be, 200 people, whatever it is, they all have to be evacuated. They have to find hotels. And what situation are you going to be in at that point?
Right.
That's a totally different world. So,
correct. And what people don't understand is that if you get evacuated, you still got to pay your mortgage, you still have to pay your maintenance fees.
That's
so
right.
Nothing changes. You know, that's the part that, you know, if the media would say that part, I think that will come with a little bit more jazz because people understand, whoa, what do you mean? Of course, you have to still pay your maintenance fees. There's still a corporation that needs to be run and you still have to pay your mortgage, assuming that you have a mortgage in that. But from a management side, I wanted to give that perspective. If you don't pass that certification, again, that's why you want to work with industry experts. From the management side, there's still a lot of coordination. Hopefully your engineer told you didn't pass and put together a specification of what's needed. They went through their process of helping you obtain the 3 bids in a sealed bid process is what we highly and strongly recommend. And then working with, you know, deciding of you're going to have the engineer supervising the work once you select that contractor. And in some cases, associations, we recommend, depending on the size of the project as well, of hiring a project manager or having the engineer as well involved within that process. So there's a lot of steps involved throughout this process. So that's why it's very important that you're working, again, I can't stress the word enough, with industry experts that can help you, guide you through this process. It can be challenging, but one thing for management that we highly recommend is just making sure that you're communicating with your residents throughout the way. I think Jason mentioned it earlier, that sometimes they don't have the proper guidance, board members. And that comes as well as with communication. It's very important that you're communicating with your residents, whatever the real situation is. You know, there's no need to sugarcoat it because at the end of the day, the truth will come out. If you have the ability, which I highly recommend, is prior to even getting it out to bid, is just paying that extra fee to the engineer to really do that discovery, to go in there and not just do the basic binocular report. Tell them to set up swings, tell them to really scope out the building thoroughly, because as Misha said, it's exponential difference. And pay a couple dollars now, you're gonna see a savings in the long term because you'll avoid change orders. You may still have some, but not at the extent as if the engineer was just using it, just kind of specking the building, checking units and using the binocular. Even though I know, Misha, you guys use drones, you're pretty advanced. Dan, I want to bring you back into this because when we're talking about all these things, we definitely don't want to scare our board members. They're volunteers. We want them to know that there's solutions that exist. With regards to cost, like what's your take when it comes to, I mean, again, I know you're not a banker, but you come in with creative solutions. How do you think the association should handle this when it comes to cost?
Well, I mentioned earlier, I mean, it really comes down to that notice. It's really important. I've been sitting here monitoring the questions and answering some of the attendees as they've been prompting and trying to give some guidance. There's some questions about, unit owner insurance and things like that. Certainly, unit owners, I'm a huge advocate of making sure you have insurance. I mean, contact your auto insurer, get that multi-line policy, usually get a discount for doing it and get your insurance. But understand though that, and a lot of times, and unfortunately, a lot of the victims of Champlain South Tower have learned, is that your unit owner insurance won't respond unless or until the association's insurance either starts or completes or its investigation or even issues coverage in favor of the association, and then only then will it provide coverage. And some of those policies, most of them, do offer coverage for special assessments. So as long as it obviously stems from a covered cause of loss, or some of the more higher end insurance policies that you buy, there may not have some sort of limitations to it. So it's an HO6 policy. Make sure that you look into it. It can help you mitigate potential special assessments that are associated with some of these things as a unit owner when dealing with it. Obviously, we're talking about a lot about inspections and doing inspections and inspections. When we're talking about inspections, you must always think about insurance, whether those inspections are for 40-year recertification, or because you just want to know the condition of your paint, or because someone's complaining about water getting into their unit or the balcony issues. Whatever it is, if you bring a professional onto your property and you do an inspection, whether it's today or tomorrow or years from now, those reports may find their way into the hands of an insurance adjuster when evaluating coverage for a loss. So it's really important that when you're obtaining these reports from engineers for the purposes of doing your recertification or whatever it may be, that you understand the implications of the terms and words, and I mentioned this before, used in those reports, and whether or not you as a board or association acted on the recommendations made by those professionals, because the insurance companies will conveniently use them to say that it was old or worn and torn, or that lack of maintenance or repair. So it's important that you understand the implications of these reports and the words used in them. And we offer all the time to associations that if you're engaging engineers to do inspections, whether it's, again, for 40 years or something else, allow us the opportunity to come out there too. Call us first, let us know what's going on. Because bringing it back to your question, Rafael, about cost, is that whether it's today or tomorrow, if these reports negatively impact your ability to recover for damages that would have otherwise been covered by insurance, you have to then find other means of getting money to make those repairs. And if you don't, again, it's a cyclical thing. Your claim's going to get denied. You're not going to get coverage, et cetera. And you continue paying more and more premium, and it's not going to work. So some of the things that we've seen is obviously on banking side, but understand that when you're looking for financing on banking, the banks are going to be looking at, whether or not you have delinquencies. They're going to look at your reserves. They're going to look at your insurance. They're going to make sure that you have proper insurance on them. I had one bank just recently want to know about unit owners and the coverage that they have, and whether or not the unit owners are buying insurance and doing things. There are brokers out there running programs that if an association buys from them, they have another department that will sell unit owner insurance at a discount so that they fully insure the building. I think you're going to see a trend like that, which I think is very creative and interesting. So when you're talking to your broker, ask them about that. Do they have another department that handles unit owners? Like, get your entire association insured, and then potentially your unit owners will have coverage for special assessments through insurance, so that if you find yourself in a situation, it won't be so burdensome. So again, another way to think about these things, to encourage unit owners to get insurance. Again, though, we find issues with foreign investors that don't want that cost of insurance because they pay cash for the unit. They don't have a bank that's requiring it. Banking shouldn't be the only reason why you have insurance. Right. Think about other reasons for it. Whether it's for a loss of income because your tenant's not paying, it's a way to protect that investment. So it's to make sure that pro forma, that balance sheet is actually paying you as it should. So a lot of different ways of doing the thing. The special assessments are always tough, and ours is struggle. We get invited to a lot of those meetings where they're talking about special assessments to investigate means and ways in which there may be coverage for some of these things. But again, it kind of breaks down to those three phases I mentioned earlier, and making sure that you identify or give prompt notice of those things. and making sure that you give the insurance company the opportunity to investigate. We had one association recently call us. Obviously they have a massive special assessment they just passed, and et cetera, whatever. They're huge and they're in a ton of debt. The project's not going as well as it should. They're on their third engineering firm, and now they want us to go out there and investigate it. Well, we're not really investigating a claim maybe on the association insurance. We're potentially now looking at a third party claim because contractor didn't perform something. And now they're bringing in legal counsel to look at potential constructive defect issues. So these things can, spin out of control, and you don't want to find yourself in that situation, and you're spending a whole lot of money on a lot of other things that you don't want to do. So take the time to understand it, involve the experts. I think that's the overriding message that I think you've heard here today from all of us. Competent legal counsel such as Jason and his entire staff at Siegfried, M2E, obviously one of the most well-known engineering firms in Florida, and well-established management companies that are run by competent individuals such as Rafael. It's always important. Obviously, Champlain South Tower, as we all know, self-managed, right? So I can tell you that I have historically seen a lot of problems and a lot of deferred issues, and because a lot of times when you're self-managed, that manager's really just doing whatever whoever's in control of that board is telling them to do. So be careful with those situations, and making sure that you're making competent decisions for your fellow unit owners is always important.
Excellent. Thank you. You drove some great points there, Dan. And when it comes to, let's say, the loan side of it, the banks are working now. Banks are becoming a little bit more open-minded. Well, I take that back. They're being a little bit stricter, but they're open-minded as well. But you need to make sure that you're working with the proper industry experts and getting your delinquencies, if that is an issue, to make sure that you get that in order. Again, there's a lot of planning that goes into this process. Doing a 40 and 50-year recertification is not something that gets done within 6 months. That is something that you need to have an outline plan with approach of what the expectations are in each way. That way you know that your manager is executing what he or she needs to execute. So we're getting close in on the hour. I want to wrap up with one last question. I guess I'll ask each of you. I'll start with you, Dan. What advice can you provide associations that are approaching the 40-year mark?
My biggest advice is, is start talking and developing your team, right? Get your team. And I talked, we do this recovery report every Thursday. And 2 weeks ago, I had on a waterproofing expert. And one of the things that we actually started talking about mostly there was about transparency, involving unit owners in the process. But have an expectation of who you may be hiring, and have some transparency. Establish goals. Treat this as the corporation it is. In most businesses, you'll notice that they post their core values and their goals in the workplace. Put those things up in your elevators, in your common areas, so that things aren't a surprise to your unit owners down the road, right? They should understand your vision as a board member. Your unit owners should participate in it, just like your employees would in any business, or your investors would in this regard. So make sure they understand that. Put together your mission statement. I stress treating it like a business, because you do have a balance sheet, you have budgets, you have insurance, you have all these things. Make sure that people understand what it is and establish it. Hang it in the office, the manager's office. And I think through transparency, you'll avoid a lot of this kicking the can. And for my benefit and the associations, there'll be prompt notice will be given. And I think you'll see a lot of mitigating expenses. You'll see less special assessments and a lot less debt financing of these projects, because again, a lot of the issues we see are recoverable through insurance with the proper notice. So it's really, really important that you are transparent, and that people understand what your goals are. They understand what your core values are. They understand your mission. It shouldn't just be about a better tennis court or pool furniture. It should be about protecting property values, the things that are important to investors, and also those that actually do occupy the units at full time. So again, Rafael, thank you, and to the rest of the obviously the attendees and my fellow panelists. This has been awesome, and a great opportunity to share some insight from our experience. So thank you again, guys. Anything we can do, obviously, GlobalPro, please let us know.
Thank you, Dan. And Jason, what advice will you provide the association board members and managers that are on the call regarding the 40, 50-year certification?
Yeah, it would take me a full day to answer that question, but in short, hire qualified people. That's the takeaway. Hire qualified people that know what they're doing, properly vet them, understand where they fit. I mean, they may not fit, it just depends on the project. So hire qualified people.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. And Misha?
Do your homework. We talk about hire qualified people and know what you're doing. Your management company deals with us professionals on a daily basis. So when they actually corral a couple of people for you to interview, don't necessarily think, oh, how come I heard from condo X that they use engineer Y and attorney Z, and they told me they charge a fraction of this engineer slash attorney that you do. Board members are board members because I'm sure that Jason and I and Dan know very much that every board has a retired general contractor, a retired engineer, and a retired lawyer that knows everything about construction and construction litigation that would love to teach us how repair of structure is done in South Florida. However, you, the management company, deal with this on a daily basis, and you know who the good players are. So I think do your homework, allow your management company to do their homework in recommending the right professionals, then do your homework by confirming that they are truly the right fit for you. And as Jason says, at the end of the day, that quality of those professionals will define how your building long-term will perform.
Thank you, Misha. Those were some great golden nuggets there. So to wrap up everything, I want to thank you all again for being here today. You guys provided some excellent knowledge, expectations, as Dan mentioned, qualified people, as Jason mentioned, and like Misha, making sure that you're hiring individuals that bring the proper value for your community. Again, I want to thank you all for being here today in the webinar. I also wanted to thank the ladies behind the scenes that make this happen on our behalf. And lastly, I wanted to thank the board members and managers that are attending today. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for taking the time to gain additional knowledge. I'm going to go ahead and post on the chat everyone's contact information. So feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions or concerns. You will receive a link from one of our organizations on where this video will be posted. And again, remember, this is a 12-part series, so we're looking forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Hope you all have a great day.
Thank you very much.